Hello everyone, welcome to Alternative View or simply Alt View. I've been thinking about doing this for a while and I'm glad it's finally happening. At Alt View, we chat with industry leaders and to get to know about them and also their opinions, insights, to hear about their views. Maybe popular, unpopular, brand new, alternative, or anything in between. I'm your host, Yaoqi from Altlayer, an elastic execution layer on Ethereum for Web3. And today I'm super glad to have Barnabé Monnot from Ethereum Foundation. His research expertise spans game theory, like large systems, crypto economics, and also decentralized systems. That's a quite impressive range there. And hi, Barnabé, and how are you doing? And can you do a quick self-intro? Yeah.
Yes, hi, Yaoqi. Thanks for having me first. I'm Barnabé. I work at the Ethereum Foundation in a research team called the Robust Incentives Group, or RIG for short. The scope of our research team, as you said, is to look at game theory, mechanism design, the crypto economics of the Ethereum protocol, pretty much. So anytime there's something to analyze that we need to understand better the economic properties or whether that's actually something that works. We typically spend time looking at it and trying to model it. Yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, sounds amazing. And I believe like we met in Devcon, right? I believe it's one of the greatest like Devcons in the history. And in your recent talk at Devcon, right, you talk about the progress on the PBS, basically proposer builder separation, right? Can you explain a little bit more like what's PBS and why we need PBS and how we can achieve PBS?
Yes. As you say, it's something I discussed also at Devcon, and I would say it's one of the topics that is very actively discussed, not just by us at EF, but also in the community more generally. So what's PBS? I would say first, it's not a specific mechanism, but it's more a design philosophy for the protocol. It's the idea that block construction, so the roles that validators today have in the system of making blocks, there are parts of that construction that can be very specialized and potentially can be done by people other than the validators themselves. So they can outsource parts of block construction to players or to entities that are not necessarily part of the protocol. And the rationale behind this is that though you have these third parties that intervene in block construction, you always ensure that block verification, so the fact that validators or even full nodes that are not participating in the consensus, they are still able to verify the work that was done by these third parties. And that verification remains cheap. And so what you can do with this is you can have very specialized parts of block construction that are done by actors who have maybe better resources or better knowledge of how to do it, but still the network as a whole is secure because you can always check that the work was done. So that's, I would say, kind of PBS in a nutshell. Then I guess the next question was, why do we need
Yeah.
PBS? And I would say need is a bit of a, it's strange to frame it in this way because I feel from my perspective is almost that PBS was imposed to us as a constraint on the protocol in a way. And now we're kind of leaning into it, but at first what we observed is that the part of the block construction that was outsourced is making the execution block payload. So basically, when you make a block, you have to write stuff about all the consensus, etc. But at the execution layer, what you do is you're packing user transactions, and that packing can be done much more efficiently by maybe third parties. And so the first appearance of PBS or PBS as a design philosophy is part of these execution payloads being made by people who are very, very specialized. And we can talk, I guess, a bit later about why that
Hmm.
happened. But the idea is that, yeah, already we've seen proposers kind of go out of the protocol and get these payloads from the outside. And so noticing that this is a thing that happens, we think, okay, well, why not leverage the fact that it's already a thing and maybe use it to our benefit as the protocol and make that a bit more formal. And so then getting to how do we achieve it, like how do we formalize it? Actually, there's many ways, and I think that's what's exciting to me as a research question is what is the best way to do it? And when you think about this, what you're really thinking about is where does the protocol concerns stop? So for today, most of PBS is done out of protocol. So you might have heard of
Hmm.
MEV boost, for instance, to get this execution payload. Um, it works. I mean, people are using it. It's a live system and it's making blocks for the protocol. But when you see that the protocol starts depending so heavily on a third-party network that the protocol doesn't necessarily have a view into it, I think it's legitimate to start thinking, well, can we maybe bring some of that back into the protocol? So that's, I would say, one side of the equation, and the other side is you also don't want to bring too much into a protocol first because it's complicated, like making
Yeah.
changes to the protocol. Like you don't want to keep doing that every time there's something new that happens outside of it. And second, you also need to make sure that when you do that, when you bring it back to the protocol, you do it correctly. Because when you do it once, like you don't necessarily have also the opportunity to update it. And so yeah, so we can I guess maybe even discuss a bit more, but there are several approaches to doing PBS in protocol. Some of them I discussed at Devcon, some of them I'm still uh, thinking about. So for instance, you could partially have the protocol backstop these out of protocol markets, but without the protocol determining what the market exactly is. That's a more recent proposal of mine that is on ETH research. Or you could, on the other hand, really specify every type of market that the proposers are able to enter into.
Yeah, it sounds great, and I know, right? So one of the reasons we want the PBS is basically want to like sort of mitigate or like the MEV. And can you talk about like right now in Ethereum, not just in Ethereum, also in general in the blockchain space, we have a lot of the MEVs or sort of like some transaction can be front run by the either the validators or some bots, right? What do you think about the MEV, and do you think MEV will affect the design of the PBS? Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, in the previous answer, I kind of said it was imposed to us, PBS, as a constraint, but I didn't really exactly say why that happened. And really, MEV is kind of a deep reason why we are getting to PBS in a more formalized way. And the idea that so first MEV, what is it? It's when you send a transaction as a user, sometimes your transaction exposes more value that can be captured. For instance, you do a trade, there might be a possible arbitrage after your trade. And so people who see your transaction, they really want to be the next transaction so that they can capture that arbitrage. And so to extract MEV, you need kind of two things. You need first knowledge, so information
Hmm.
that this is a strategy that I can deploy and capture the value. And the second thing, which is, I would say, not necessary, but is kind of the ultimate power, is to be the proposer. Because as the
Hmm.
proposer, you have a final word over which transaction get into your block, in what order.
That's true.
You can even insert the transactions yourself. So there are ways to extract MEV where you're not the proposer. For instance, with priority gas auctions, you just try to be the first person in the block so that you front run everyone else. But ultimately, what the place where the MEV power really lies is in the hands of the proposer. And so this second power of being the proposer, that's given to you by the protocol. So in proof of work, you had to mine, and then you would get the right to make a block. in proof of stake, you're picked randomly from the set of validators. So that power is kind of protocol given, but the information and the knowledge, it's not something that is at hand for most proposers. Let's say the average proposer isn't capable of running very complex arbitrary strategies or knowing that there is value that can be extracted, etc. And so typically in markets, when there is information asymmetry and one side has more information than the other side, you kind of try to get into an agreement to say, well, I'll pay you for this information, or I will, or we enter into a deal where, you can tell me what the opportunity is, and I can extract it for you as a proposer. And so that's, I would say, the first instantiation of PBS was block proposers or block producers reaching out to these specialized third parties. So they were called searchers in proof of work. Now we know them as builders because they make the whole block, and trying to get from these third parties information about what the best opportunities are. And that information is valuable. So it's costly to obtain it, but it doesn't mean that proposers actually pay for the information. In fact, the builders are competing to get the right to make the block because they know that they can extract value from it as well.
Yeah, I see. And do you think like later on, once we have the PBS, right, we have a separation between like sort of builders and proposers. Do you think we can make Ethereum more decentralized? For example, we can have more like sort of builders distributed everywhere. In that case, we can have better like censorship resistance. Yeah.
So yes, there's an argument. So the argument for doing PBS is if you don't have this idea of outsourcing parts of the block production, then the average block proposer, which let's say a solo staker who's validating from home, they can't access these very specialized markets. And so they kind of lose out on the rewards that very sophisticated validators can accumulate. And so over time in your system, like if you let it play out for years or even decades, you would notice that the unsophisticated proposers, which you kind of like to have in your system because they do backstop a lot of things. We can talk about censorship, for instance. So these unsophisticated proposers, they are going to be there's going to be a wealth effect where they get smaller and smaller in proportion in your system. So in a way, it might have this positive impact if you are able to outsource and provide a fair market for everyone. Then everybody kind of has the same return. There's no economies of scale. But on the other hand, the flip side of that coin is you're kind of pushing out the centralization pressures to the builder entity. And so then you might expect that if it's very competitive and you have to be very sophisticated to be a good builder, then you might not have many builders in the market. And now the problem, which is, I would say, well known in economics as the principal agent problem, is the idea that when you're outsourcing things to someone, that person might not share the same value function as yourself, or they might not want to make the block the way you would have made it. So both good because you get more, but also bad because your preferences as a proposer might not be shared by the builder. And part of his preferences is, for instance, you might want certain transactions to go in that the builder doesn't want. So censorship. And in that case, you have to think of mechanisms to try and reassert maybe part of the proposer's value function or preferences into the builder's constraint. And so, so then there are mechanisms that can allow us to do this. For instance, inclusion list. So the idea that before having the block made for them, the proposer says, okay, you can make the block, but I really want these transactions to be in, or you have to prove to me that you couldn't include them because, for instance, your block was already full. And these kinds of mechanisms, they work, and they could even work, I guess, today without much changes to the trust model of these out of protocol markets. But kind of make clear that if the best builders are builders that censor, in a way, as a proposer, when you make these lists, when you say I need these transactions to be in, if a builder says, well, I don't want them to be in my block, so I'm just not
Yeah.
going to make a block for you. So you have to make this trade-off between providing censorship resistance to the network and getting the
Hmm.
best value block for yourself. That's true when the best builder is censoring. And so yeah, then the question is how do you make that cost instead of honest proposers bearing only themselves the cost of censorship? How do you maybe make that cost internalized by the network as a whole? And so it's kind of the direction of research that people are thinking about right now.
Yeah, I think probably as you mentioned, right, the inclusion list of probably this commit and review, or even like probably some hardware enhancement and measures can help on like, for example, either the fast sequencing or basically include like sort of the transaction like header first before like sort of include the entire transaction later.
Mhm.
As you mentioned, right, it includes like probably both economic considerations at the same time. We probably also need to have some modification on the protocol side. Yeah, I just feel like,
Mhm.
as you mentioned, right, definitely PBS, I believe, is a very new direction to address a lot of concerns we have in current crypto space. Yeah, and another point, right? In Devcon, as we all know, right, the rollup is definitely another interesting topic, right? And I read through your like basically your article back in February on the analysis of all the rollups economics. It was a great article. I basically I recommend all the audience to also read about that article. Can you share a little bit like about like sort of your considerations after your analysis on all the rollup system, right? How does the rollup system capture the values either from the users or from the applications? Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, yes. So I guess I started this analysis mostly because I was myself very confused about how rollups work. Like I couldn't figure out how their revenues were matched with their
Hmm.
expenditures. Like it's a very, I would say, much more complicated piping than you have at the base layer. And so, but it felt like there was maybe some generality that could be extracted. So I was seeing how each rollup was running their own operations, and my aim was to try and come up with a framework that would be helpful to understand a bit better what is the design space and how do rollups capture value or deal with their expenditures. So, for instance, rollups definitely always need to publish the data to the base layer. So,
Yeah.
whatever they do, they have these constraints which they can't go around. And so any way they organize their kind of economics on their side, like they have to make it in a way that eventually they can pay for uh, the base layer data publication. And so, yeah, so the idea of what is value and how does it flow through that system,
Hmm.
it was something I had started thinking about back when I was working on EIP 1559, which is the gas
Hmm.
market for Ethereum.
Yeah.
At the time, the questions were, well, what does EIP 1559 price? How does it relate to the supply of gas? And so when I was looking at this question, it focused my attention on thinking about, okay, when users come to the Ethereum system, the base layer, like what do they want out of it? What is the value that they get from using it? And that was helpful to understand EIP 1559 as, let's say, a congestion pricing device that
Hmm.
tells you exactly what is the price that people would be willing to pay to enter the block, etc. And it's, I would say, for EIP 1559, it's enough to to look at this. But then when you start looking at user demand, you have more wilder things that start appearing, like MEV. So suddenly
Yeah.
it's a very different type of user demand, because it's not exactly someone comes to a chain and they want to do something. It's like they want to do something as a reaction to someone coming to the chain. And then the user value, it becomes very complicated to represent. So for instance, I have a, let's say, huge value for buying an NFT, but if the NFT is sold out, then my transaction, I don't have any value for it. So the state of Ethereum and the preference of users over that state, it's like this incredibly complex, huge space that you're trying to make sense of, and as a protocol or as a market designer, you're trying to price that. And so yeah, and so then you have the same in rollups. I would say the start of the pipeline is users wanting to do something, like that's really the motive energy of your system. And then you're trying to understand from this value inflow, that's how I termed it in that post, from this value inflow, how does the rollup sort of capture or divides, or yeah, how does it use that economic value to run its operation? So for instance, they need to pay for the base layer cost. The rollup operators need to pay for their full nodes, or they need to pay for when they have to make proofs, either in optimistic rollups or in validity rollups. So yeah, so there's a lot of ways that value kind of gets transformed over that pipeline. For instance, if you're a user and you're waiting because the rollup is full and you can't include your transaction, then it's destruction of economic values. You have to price that as the rollup as well. You might say, okay, let's use EIP 1559. So you have all these like different ways of thinking about value, where it flows, how to use it. Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at with this post, to more properly write what these flows were.
Yeah, I think we can together work on some framework to do a proper analysis on the rollup stuff. Yeah, beyond that, as you know, right, recently, like apart from these general purpose rollups, right, like Optimism or Arbitrum, we also see a bunch of these application specific rollups, right? And do you think the value proposition for this application specific rollup will be different compared to the general purpose rollup? Like as these sort of rollup providers, right, they may subsidize the cost for the users as the provider itself is the application. So they have the incentives to really to basically capture more users than sort of as a user to pay more, right? What's your thought on this? Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, then let's say if you have this framework that kind of maps the design space for you, I think it's, in my opinion, it gets a bit easier than to think through alternative designs, and especially, okay, what happens then if the user demands, we force it to be very specific. So app specific rollup is to say, okay, we don't now allow like all these different types of user demands. There's just like a very simple stream of user demands. And simple is a big exaggeration because it can still be complicated. But yeah, so how do you think through that? Well, that rollup still has, I would say, some constraints. So paying, for instance, for the data availability. But if you want to subsidize it, there's maybe different tools that you have at your disposal. For instance, is rollups can mint their own token, and that can be used as a way to yeah, move the cost around in a sense. So when the user sends a transaction, you can say, okay, sure, you don't have to pay for it, but on some other side, I have as a rollup to pay for my running costs. And so maybe these costs, I can, in a sense, tokenize it in the form of extra issuance and sort of reimburse people who are expending costs to make these users use the subsidized app chain. Yeah, to make these parties running this specialized app chain kind of whole, like so that they have they're compensated for the cost that they expend. That's one way. Another way is then also just I don't know, VC funding. Like you can say, well, if you're running a full node for my app specific chain, I will just reimburse you for the costs and whatever you're publishing to the base layer also. But you can still think of if you think of the rollup system as like a more general entity, this VC money funding that is piped like directly to the operator's bank accounts, you can even think of it as more value that just enters that rollup system. And so maybe there's an argument here to rebalance the costs or like different ways that you can think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. As we all know, right, a bunch of work has been done at Ethereum Foundation, like basically to empower the L2 scaling solutions, right? So in your opinion, what are the missing parts for the layer two solutions, like for example, rollup solutions? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so I would say I haven't actively worked on L2s for a couple of months now, mostly because I was active on PBS, but I do try to follow as much as possible kind of updates and the new things that are happening in that world. Uh, I would say generally my impression is it feels like we are not exactly where we thought we would be maybe a year ago. So people were saying, okay, L2 22, that's the year where everybody's moving to rollups. It feels like maybe that has happened. Like definitely there's been a lot more adoption for rollups than previously, and rollups have matured more, etc. But I don't know, maybe it's like it's a bear market and the gas prices on Ethereum are not so high, so there wasn't such a strong push to like really everybody moving to a rollup. But yeah, I would say it does feel like perhaps we had higher expectations, which okay, then the other side is having seen, for instance, the development cycles that went into making the merge happen, which is like a very
Mhm.
complicated update. It also feels like often in that space we're like, okay, this is like a no-brainer. Like we can do this in a couple of months and get it to production, like no problem. And yeah, the reality is also that rollups or Ethereum or any other chain, it's just like a huge piece of engineering. And so when you look at the updates that were done, and they're really significant. So, for instance, Bedrock for or Canon
Mhm.
for Optimism, Nitro for uh, Arbitrum, all the ZK EVMs, which are some very differentiated from one another and sort of address different parts of the market, and not just ZK EVM, but even things like Cairo for Starkware. Like it's
Mhm.
very clear that a lot of engineering effort has been spent. The results are kind of showing. It's we also have on protocol side things like 4844 or proto-denk sharding that will boost the protocol's ability to provide data availability for the rollups. So yeah, there's a lot of moving pieces at the same time, and it feels like maybe it will come to fruition, I guess, a little later than maybe we expected. But I don't know. I would say, yeah, what's missing is maybe these final pieces, things like decentralized
Mhm.
sequencers, I think are very important. And at the moment, there's not like a clear rollup that has, yeah, put that into production in a way that feels nice. So yeah, I still a bit more to do, but also recognizing that there's been a lot of work done, and maybe we'll just yeah keep pushing a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, right? For the past year, I would say there are a lot of great achievements for either optimistic rollup or ZK rollup. And meanwhile, as you mentioned, right, on the base layer like Ethereum is heavily pushing the dash sharding and EIP 4484 to really help to make the data availability layer to be relatively less expensive for the rollup projects. And I think all these achievements finally will sort of pay off. Yeah, and for the last question, right? As you know, we are doing these alternative views. That means we want to know some alternative advice or suggestions, like you can leave to our listeners and audience. Like, what kind of alternative advice you have for us?
Okay, I have two. So the first one is I would say more qualitative, but it feels interesting to talk about it is the idea of imposter syndrome, and the idea that when you start in that space and you're trying to understand like what the hell is going on, it feels very daunting, and it feels like, oh my God, like there's these galaxy brains around that already know everything. Like, how can you like do something that's new and relevant? And yeah, my advice here is that imposter syndrome, in my opinion, never really disappeared. Like I still feel myself like, oh my God, like there's so much more that I could be doing, or there are like other people doing like crazy stuff. And I'm mentioning it because we have this program. It's the third time that it's running. It's called the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship, and so we have like this cohort of 25 people who are first, they're really brilliant and they're great and they really are super motivated to work. And this came up in a discussion where they said, it's like difficult to project yourself in that space because it feels already like very competitive, very like everybody's like having super elaborate arguments on Twitter and stuff. But yeah, my advice here is to like not be um yeah, don't feel scared and try to find something that speaks to you, or at least that's kind of how I started. Is I was looking for problems that I was like, okay, this looks like something that's manageable for me. I don't need to understand everything at once. I can just focus on this one thing, and then taking my own spin on it and trying to build up from there, just talking to people, understanding also that most people in the space are extremely reachable, which is really nice. Like they're never going to say, oh, you should know this by now. Like we were trying to figure it out. There's a lot of things that nobody really understands or even knows about. So yeah, so generally people are just kind of happy to talk about it and to try and make sense of it together. That would be the first one. And then okay, that was I guess more qualitative. So I wanted to also give one that is more about crypto, a bit less meta. And an alternative view that sometimes I have is I keep wondering if we can do better than burning the base fee of EIP 1559. It's become like a pretty big meme. And I would say, yeah, since the start of EIP 1559, there's been I checked the number yesterday, and it's more than 2.5 million ETH that was burned. So if you think of it as like
ultrasound
revenue,
money.
yeah. So yeah, I'm wondering like, okay, this is $4 billion that we just lit on fire. It's not exactly that, but we can think of it as issuance that just never happened or something. But you have like this pot, which is not really a pot if you consider it burned, but are there maybe better things that we can do with it? And for instance, were we too quick to say, okay, this is the only way we can do it? Like it's true that it's a huge amount, and most DAOs today don't have the organizational capacity to even allocate such amounts of money. But sometimes I daydream and I say, we are mechanism designers. There's this huge space of mechanisms. Why did we pick like the one that feels the simplest of just, we're not going to bother with it. We're just going to put it in the bin. I don't know. But so, I don't have a good answer for it, mostly because I feel we are very early in our understanding of what Ethereum is, and in relation what if the asset is. Like we don't know if it's money, we don't know what properties it has, we don't know how people want to use it. Like we just know that you need it to pay for stuff on Ethereum. So I don't know. But I don't have a good answer, but I'm just putting it out there as maybe something alternative that sometimes I like to think about.
Yeah, really appreciate your two advices. Yeah, that's amazing. I think definitely from all your experience and all your like sort of learning for the past. And but I really appreciate your time. It was great talking to you. And really thanks for all the attentions from our like audience community members. And hope you found this like sort of session very useful and interesting. And in the coming months, we will just talk to more experts in the industry about Layer 2 scalabilities and also the economics around the crypto space. And yeah, for more information, please subscribe our channel and signing off till the next time. Yeah, thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
Yaoqi.